You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today we start with our discussion on the Great American Songbook, Chapter 1, The Male Pop Singer, with musicologist Jimmy Scalia. And now, here's Steve.
Hi, buddy. Just so nice to be back on the American continent. It's been 4 weeks, and I'm just excited to be back with my great team here. Jimmy, welcome to our show. If we're going to talk about music as knowledgeable as Arthur and Julian and Mike are, well, we all felt that we needed somewhat of an expert to join us, and we have with us today archivist and musicologist Jimmy Scalia, and I'm going to turn it over to Arthur, who you've known for apparently many years.
Jimmy's a friend, and we're going to be talking about the Great American Songbook today. And when you really think about it, there's probably a dozen great male pop singers who've broke this thing out into commercial popularity worldwide. We all know Frank Sinatra, of course, and there's a group of these guys. One of those guys is probably as great a song stylist and singer in so many ways that I've ever known, and I think Jimmy agrees. Jimmy Scalia is the archivist for Bobby Darin. He takes care of all of his music and all of his recordings and television and movie work. And Jimmy, it's great to have you here today. I think the guys would love to hear from you how you got into this. How did this all happen for you?
Well, you know, I would like to say luck, but now after being in this game for over 25 years, I think it was meant to be. Somebody else had their hands on the steering wheel, but it started with a love. I fell in love with a guy named Darin at 7 years old back in 1967, thanks to my dad. And I just carried that passion and love. And before I knew it, one step after another, I got to meet his inner circle. A good friend of ours, Harriet Wasser, which we refer to as Hesh, was his PR person. And a lot of other people in the Darin team over the years. And thus, I became the archivist. So that's how it kind of started for me.
And Harriet Wasser, Julian would love to know, as the other guys would too, was also the PR person in the mid-'50s for Sammy Davis Jr., including Mr. Wonderful, one of our favorite shows.
Let me ask a quick question of Jimmy. What do you think it was about Bobby Darin that really appealed to you as a 7-year-old? I mean, what did this young man do to you in terms of reach you?
Actually, I was brought in by my dad. My dad went to the School of Performing Arts. He lived in Brooklyn, which Arthur Victimone was from Brooklyn in Lafayette High School, where my dad went. So I was mistaken when we were talking. I thought it was Jersey at first yesterday. Anyway, so what happened is my dad goes to Juilliard and not School of Performing Arts. And what happens is he knows a lot about music, joins the Marines, and then he resides in Bergen County, Lodi, New Jersey. And so his collection of music, he had such an eclectic collection of music. And from a little kid, just knee high, he would play all this different type of music, whether it be rock and roll, standard, swing, jazz. And he would continually talk to me when these records would be playing, and sometimes put the needle back on the record again and say, listen to this. So I learned how to listen to music, and I really respected him. And he had a Bobby Darin album. He had numerous Bobby Darin albums, but he gifts me his Bobby Darin Greatest Hits album, The Bobby Darin Story. Side 1, rock and roll, appeals to a kid like me. Side 2, I'm starting to listen to some swing music, Artificial Flowers, Lazy River, what have you. And now and that's when I fell in love. It was love at first sight.
Well, one of the interesting things, I was doing some work on our show to hear that Bobby was a huge fan of Al Jolson, who a lot of us know was the world's greatest entertainer. You can't get anybody bigger than Al Jolson and the man and how he influenced so many people. Bobby claimed, I think, to see the Jolson story 13 times.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and obviously you could see that what Jolson had, that let's say Crosby and Sinatra, they're crooners, but Bobby, he kind of went after that Jolson excitement, that entertaining, where he was loud at times and really let it go. Let's let it go. And I'd love to hear what you know about that.
Well, it's true. Bobby did love Jolson. And as a matter of fact, he did some of his songs even on his Oh Look at Me Now album, which was arranged and conducted by Billy May. I mean, you got the best in the business with Darin, and that was on Capitol. And he's doing like Blue Skies and so on and so forth. And I think he became seasoned by learning from these people, because you remember Jolie's line, "You ain't seen nothing yet." And that was pretty much like about Darin, and everything was like, a right cross and an upper hook, so it was just, he would entertain with that much vitality.
Well, Jimmy, I want to add to that, if I may. Bobby Darin was really far more than a singer. He was the full 9 yards of talent, of entertainment. So when you saw him in a nightclub, you're looking at a guy who was doing everything, playing instruments, doing impressions, very funny guy, had great sense of humor, great song, great dancing and all that. So if you really learn his story, you find out that his mother, the woman he thought was his mother, was an old showgirl. And she brought to his attention from the time he was a little kid, the great old showman, Al Jolson, Harry Richmond, who knows, guys, Eddie Cantor. So he was familiar with that kind of music from the time he was a kid. And when he becomes a star through Splish Splash and the Mac the Knife and all that, Bobby converts songs like Up the Lazy River, old songs. She told him, you want to do something different? Take the old songs and make them new, make them yours. And he did that a number of times. Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey was a million-selling record. So he had that kind of a knack. But the whole idea of him was, somebody asked me years ago, was Bobby Darin as good as Frank Sinatra? And the answer is no, not as a pop singer. Frank Sinatra, forget about it, he's Mount Everest. But Bobby Darin as a showman was right there with Sammy Davis Jr. And I'm sure you found that out as the archivist. You're looking at his stuff. I mean, he was really unbelievable as a full talent. Jimmy, what the songs that he was known for from the American Songbook? We all know him from Splish Splash, Dream Lover, maybe Queen of the Hop, certainly Mac the Knife and Beyond the Sea. But he did albums of the Great American Songbook. He was great. Tell us something about that.
Well, first of all, his albums were just so diverse. He touched on so many genres of music, but he did manage to give us a number of LPs, which they were kind of against. Ahmet Ertegun was against the That's All LP, because at that point he wanted to do an album of standards. And he was already a teenage hit, and he was on Bandstand. He was, doing all the juke joints and so on and so forth. But after a certain point, he wanted to do these standards. And, it ain't necessarily so. The That's All album is really incredible. Because, all right, you have Mac the Knife, and what he does is he flips it on its ear. He just kicks it. He just swings it. And other albums he does, he's always doing stuff, whether it's by Cole Porter. He's taking a lot of these great songwriters and doing their songs on, whether at Atco or when he moved to Capitol in approximately 1962, 63. And he was able to do the Great American Songbook, because I feel when Bobby started, he loved the music of the Great American Songbook, and that had staying power. And his eye was always on the prize. So if he needed to do rock and roll, to break through. That's what he did. And it worked. And then he started forging over. And that's when he's doing songs like Caravan and Have You Got Any Castles? And just so many great songs that on these albums, like This Is Darin and That's All and Winners. Oh, and Love Swings is a beautiful album. It's great. And he really did it. He sold it.
Well, what you say, Jimmy, is so true. His eyes were always on the prize, even before Splish Splash. He had a recording of $1 Million Baby right out of the Great American Songbook. But when he was in competition, so to speak, with Frankie Avalon and Fabian and Paul Anka in those days anyway, they were all doing rock and roll. He broke through. His mother actually told him, this is the way you get in. You got to go through rock and roll. So and he writes Splish Splash. And then gets involved with Queen of the Hop, which I still maintain he wrote with Woody Harris. I don't care what Woody ever said. But he was always looking beyond into how can I sustain the career? And it was through the Great American Songbook. Now, Julian, you would be interested because of being a very successful Broadway producer. Bobby Darin has an album that is called In a Broadway Bag. I would put that album of Great American songs from the Great American Songbook, the Broadway songs, to me is one of the greatest albums I've ever listened to, including the Sinatra stuff and Nat Cole and Dean Martin and Tony Bennett. In a Broadway Bag is something our listeners should find probably online. He's doing all the Broadway stuff. Fantastic. And one of the things that he did as a knack was if a song was known to be upbeat, he usually turned it into a ballad. If a song was known to be a ballad, he turned it upbeat. If you look at How to Succeed in Business, You Got the Cool, Clear Eyes of a Seeker of Wisdom and Truth. He does that slowly, as opposed to the upbeat kind of ways. Bobby was great. Jimmy, a question for you.
Yes.
We're talking about Bobby Darin. Tell us who some of your other favorite messengers of the Great American Songbook are. Is it Tony Bennett? Is it Al Martino? Is it Dean Martin? Certainly Sinatra. Tell us about your thoughts.
Well, definitely Sinatra. There's always been a respect for Sinatra because he's the voice. His phrasing was good, and he really was for real. Dean Martin, obviously, because who doesn't like Dean Martin? And his voice is of like olive oil. So you kind of love Dino. He's all relaxed. Al Martino, good, Spanish Eyes, what have you. And even like Vic Damone. We enjoyed, listening to Vic Damone in the house and so on and so forth. And I think,
you like Jerry Vale?
Jerry Vale is good.
Good
Jerry
voice.
Vale is very good. Yes, he's got a great voice. And you have to remember, Lodi's predominantly where I grew up and I actually still live. Whoever leaves, right? We just listen to a lot of Italian music anyway. So, and some of the greatest singers were Italian. So what you have is, your Al Martino and Vic Damone and like we were saying, and Buddy Greco I liked. But Buddy Greco was an entertainer and he had some good chops. He had a couple of songs that were really pretty good. But he was almost a little like Darin, but he was just a couple of years back. But he fell into the vernacular of those Rat Pack kind of guys and that Vegas stuff, and even playing the small clubs in New York City. And very talented, and started with Benny Goodman. He was the keyboard player.
I was working consulting for a guy named Alan Klein, who was the manager of both the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and he had a very mixed reputation, but he was a good man to me. But he believed in what he called the self-contained artist, the artist who can write the songs and also perform the songs. And his first was one of the greats, and that was Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke in the 50s and early 60s had so many hits, and every one of them he wrote. Yes. He started out with You Send Me, which was a #1 song for many years. But you remember that great scene where Harrison Ford is with Kelly McGillis, and they sing The Wonderful World? The headlights are on. She's a woman in...
Which one, Jim?
Yeah, what was it? Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Witness.
No.
Witness, right. Yes, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Witness, yes.
Yeah. And the headlights are on and they're dancing. But he wrote Wonderful World. I mean, he wrote Twisting the Night Away. He wrote Everybody Loves to Cha-Cha-Cha. What I'm trying to say is that what Bobby did at the beginning was what these guys did throughout. Bobby didn't even need to write his own songs, I guess, after a while.
Well, but he did, though. He did
He
write.
He wrote some, sure, of course.
But you mentioned Sam Cooke. There was a huge talent, and most people don't know about him. He died very young.
33.
33 years old. He was incredible.
Incredible. And again, a guy who had 29, 30 hits. And in those days, singles mattered more than albums. Yeah. And this guy had 29 or 30. So Sam Cooke, one of the greats. Yeah.
Yes.
Can I mention someone I've always been curious about, because his name comes up as in a lot of backgrounds in movies. I don't know anything about this guy, but do you guys know anything you could share with me about Russ Columbo?
Yeah, he was the first guy in. He preceded Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby, yes, that's right.
Where the blue of the night meets the gold of the day was gotten by Crosby, but it was Russ Columbo.
And he was another singer, right, that died very young.
Very young.
Died young. He was.
Was he shot?
Late 20s.
I'm trying to think how he passed.
But Crosby evolved from Russ Columbo. He was really the first, as I know it, the first singer of pop songs. With that style of, that kind of a groaning sound, evolves into Crosby. Crosby evolves into Frank Sinatra. And it all goes from that point on. But Sinatra just kept getting better. Sinatra had different eras of his voice. His voice was very thin at the beginning.
But Arthur, didn't Sinatra fall on a bit of hard times at a while? Because I know that before he got back on... Well, I know that the melding of his music career and his movie career became very much together. But I'd heard that before he did From Here to Eternity, where he won the Oscar that year, that his voice was beginning to lose his voice.
Well, it wasn't just that, Steve. Mitch Miller, who ran Columbia Records and was a huge powerhouse, fired his ass, threw him out. And he was lost for a while. Ava Gardner didn't help. It helped in some ways, I'm sure, but not in others.
She threw him in.
And then it was Alan Livingston, the guy who married someone you interviewed, Steve, Nancy Olson. Nancy Olson, who ran Capitol Records, who said, I'll hire you, Frank, but you have to work with my guy. And his guy, Nelson Riddle. And that's the story.
But part of it, Julian, is that by that time, Sinatra, which would have been 53, Jimmy, is that right? When he made the first Swing of the Lovers, his voice got richer. Something happened to his voice. A lot of people say it's from his drinking, from smoking, whatever it was. His voice got richer, deeper, and blending whatever he was doing at that time with the great Nelson Riddle, and then Billy May. And then here comes From Here to Eternity, and he becomes the biggest star in the world once again. After really being down, you're right, a couple, 2, 3 years, he was kind of out of it.
No question. What's an interesting story, Arthur? I don't know if I've ever told it on our show. I was friendly with Eli Wallach. Eli Wallach was offered Maggio in From Here to Eternity. Oh. And he wanted to do a Tennessee Williams play on Broadway, and he turned it down.
Right.
And that's how Sinatra was able to get it.
But and Sinatra read the book.
Eli said that every time he and Sinatra met, Sinatra started out by saying, "Hello, you crazy actor."
But you see, Sinatra read the book, and he saw Maggio as himself. And as I understand it, I think we may have discussed this before, I believe he went to Ava Gardner.
He did.
That was his love at the time. She, in turn, called Harry Cohn, who ran Columbia Pictures, and asked for the favor. And I think Harry Cohn paid him, $7,000.
I think it was $8,000, but you're right.
Whatever. And so he now does. But the thing about it is that From Here to Eternity, the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor collides with these new recordings with Nelson Riddle and Billy May, and then later Don Costa. It all collides, and he explodes. But right at that point, another thing happens with the American Songbook. A little guy named Eddie Fisher comes along. and starts selling records, unbelievable, millions and millions of records. There's Perry Como at that time, who was also a big star. And then, of course, once those guys are all in and hitting big time, apart from one-hit wonders like Don Rondo, you know who that was, Jimmy?
Two different worlds.
Two different worlds, right.
Wow.
Don Cornell, Don Cherry, all these Dons. But
Don Newcomb.
Along comes a guy named Elvis and changes the game. And I think from time to time he's utilized the American Songbook. Would I be right, Jim? Elvis?
Yeah. Or who?
Elvis.
I don't really believe all that much.
A little bit.
A little bit. No, he had done some songs, but not. I don't think making albums of the American Songbook.
It would have been great. Here's a list of some of the great artists who devoted an album to the Great American Songbook. Carly Simon, so great. Mm-hmm. Paul McCartney, Rod Stewart made a living on it. You got 3 or 4.
5 or 6 albums.
Yeah.
5 or 6 albums.
Yeah. Sting, who's so great. Bette Midler. And of course, Barry Manilow, who did it. He did the American Songbook later on. Fact of the matter is that the Great American Songbook is to America's music. We have jazz, that's American. Dixieland, that's some people might say it's jazz, is Dixieland. It's a great sound, is American. And the Great American Songbook. But when we go back to what Jimmy was talking about with Bobby Darin, when he got into that songbook, a lot of it didn't hit, so to speak. Unlike the Sinatra stuff and Tony Bennett and Dean Martin, some of Bobby's greatest work didn't hit. But because music makes things alive no matter what, if you listen to it today, it's great. I mean, he did some songs that, in my opinion, he did better than anybody who ever recorded them.
Arthur,
so worth looking into. Broadway Bag.
Arthur, where would you place Nat King Cole in this mix?
The elite of the elites. Right up there with all of them.
You got to say as high as it gets.
Yeah, as high as it gets.
Yeah. So when we've mostly been talking about Caucasian gentlemen, so let's talk a little bit about black singers. So you're saying you got to start with Nat King Cole.
Well, first of all, don't forget Sam Cooke we discussed, and he was definitely black.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Nat King Cole started with the King Cole Trio. He was not singing. He was just playing the piano. That was his beginning. And then eventually, supposedly in a movie that I saw, some drunk said, "You got to sing," which I'm sure is not how it happened, but he did become this extraordinary singer. And we have, if you want to discuss one of the great black artists who Frank Sinatra said the only genius in show business was Ray Charles. As far as Sinatra was concerned and many other people, but Charles's influence was Nat King Cole. And I think it's because they both played the piano and sang. I think that's what he meant. Because you wouldn't think of Ray Charles as singing like Nat King Cole singing.
Yeah. Ray Charles opened a new page. Here was a guy who was so great, singing with passion, with a sound that was kind of different. When Bobby Darin came on the scene, there was Splish Splash, rock and roll. There was Queen of the Hop, rock and roll. Dream Lover, a little bit of a different sound. And here comes Mac the Knife, which was as big an explosion as there's ever been in the music business. But it had an incredible earthy sound to it, a real guttural kind of a great sound to it, which is really what happened with the Ray Charles. It was a different sound. When he did Georgia, it was forget about it. It was unbelievable. Jimmy, where are you at with Louis Armstrong?
Oh, Louis Armstrong's way up there. I mean, just as a jazz trumpet player, because jazz really is the American form of music that we own. We created jazz. I mean, it kind of filtered down over the decades, and you had people in like England or Paris kind of keeping it alive. But Louis Armstrong was pretty much well up there. I mean, I hold him in high regard. And plus, my dad was a trumpet player. So what happened was, I would always tend to lean to the trumpet players like Bunny Berrigan, or my dad's teacher was Doc Cheatham. I don't know if you fellas even know who Doc Cheatham is. And so, yeah, Louis Armstrong.
But tell the guys what Bunny Berrigan's biggest hit song was. Remember?
Oh,
I've flown around the world in a plane.
That's it. I can't get started with you. Bunny Berrigan. Yeah.
Who are your favorites, Jim? Who are some of the other favorites of yours?
Singers, trumpet player, musicians? Singers. Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I'm right across the board. I'm a big fan, obviously, of Sam Cooke, and I really respect Elvis. Of course, Darin's the top of my heap.
Let me lay one on you, okay? Let me try you on one, and you should know this guy. Okay. Jimmy Rosselli.
Oh, forget it. He's Italian.
Tell the guys
How am
about
I not
Jimmy
going to know
Rosselli.
the Italian? And you know what they say? He was one of the greatest singers. I think I'm not sure if he was a Neapolitan Italian singer, but he was le coup de grace.
Mala Femina.
Mala Femina. Yeah. And so, but unfortunately, he had that little tussle with Frank. I don't know if anybody knows the story. When he was coming up, Frank's mom loved Jimmy, and they wanted Jimmy to sing her birthday party. At her birthday party, he neglected to do so, and Frank put the kibosh on him. And so it kind of, stifled his career and Jimmy Rosselli was a real professional gangster. He can really hold his.
He was a gangster's guy. But you saying to me and us and the listeners that Jimmy Rosselli turned down singing at Frank Sinatra's mother's birthday party?
Yes,
I can't believe that.
So the story goes.
Want to get paid?
The other story about that is that we all know that the mob had their connections with nightclubs. Right. And I think that's what he did. I think he was blackballed. He couldn't play the nightclubs. He was a great singer and a great, wonderful voice. But,
he wouldn't do that because he didn't pay him enough money.
Jimmy, we cut you off, though. You were about to say, as the story goes.
Okay. And now, here's where the senior moment kind of creeps in. Let's see, what was I going to say now?
That's okay. Believe me.
I think I was wrapping it up as telling the story and just saying, as the story goes, because then I take the fifth, because you never know if there's no necks around the area, But that's pretty much how I heard it went down. And I think there was some truth to that. So.
Yes. Anyhow, it's interesting. Arthur mentioned Eddie Fisher, who he knew very well, and they were good friends. And I remember reading, Arthur, I'm not sure you know this. You'll get a kick out of it if you don't. Eddie Fisher was so enamored of Al Jolson that ostensibly his daughter, Jolie, was named after Al Jolson.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Eddie's was born in 1928 when Jazz Singer got out, and his father nicknamed him Sonny Boy. So he had the Jolson thing going from the very beginning. Look, guys, the Jolson, to people who saw the movie when we were children or beyond, there's never been a movie like that before. I mean, the camera's in his face. Larry Parks had him down pat. So kids like Bobby Darin and us from the Bronx and what have you, we looked at this, we couldn't believe it. This guy it was one of the great movies of all time. And he was unknown to us before the movie, but he was as big a star as there was ever in the world in the 1920s and 30s. And then he came down, and then the movie comes out and he's Al Jolson again, but he was different. No one was quite like him. I'll give you another one that's interesting to show you about how great the Great American Songbook can be. It doesn't make a difference if your voice is like Mario Lanza. You don't have to have if you've got passion, if you are original, if you have the thing going that's so important is soul, I guess. You can take a guy like Jimmy Durante, who sings classic standard songs as well as anybody. And he had no voice at all, except his voice was something. How would you describe it, Julian?
Well, I would say this.
Gravel.
To hear Sinatra version and then Jimmy Durante's version of Young at Heart.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, two of the great versions, totally different.
Totally different.
But I would say almost, Arthur, he was above Rex Harrison kind of talking, but he was that much higher, He didn't have the range, but he had the heart.
How does he compare to Russell Crowe singing in Les Miserables?
Well, come on.
The crowd groaned.
Yeah. There's a great story of Sinatra sitting in a lounge in Vegas, and he's sitting with some people, and one of the guys comes in, one of the singers. I won't mention his name, but I'm not going to mention Victor Moore. Anyway, and he hands Sinatra and his newest album. He says, "Frank, I want you to listen to this." And Frank says to him, "I don't have to listen. You got it in the throat, but it's not about the throat. It's about the heart." And there was Sinatra's thing again. There was no one conveyed more through his heart and his true passion. He was unbelievable. He really was a freak in terms of greatness. He was Secretariat, Tiger Woods. He was, he had the whole package. But the passion part, that's where a guy like Durante and Bobby Darin, when you hear Bobby Darin doing the standards, you'll hear that. You'll get a different feeling. Somebody once said Jack Jones is a great singer. He was a great singer. He had great voice. Vic Damone, great voice. Jerry Vale, great voice, especially singing in Italian. But Bobby Darin didn't have that great voice by his own admission. But he had that certain something that comes through the record, comes through anything, particularly when you saw him in person.
Arthur, is there anyone today for our younger listeners who might not be aware of a lot of these singers? Is there anyone today singing the American Songbook?
Yes. David Foster.
Said Rod Stewart. We said that Rod Stewart.
Rod Stewart, of course. But David Foster did something really brilliant. He decided that the Great American Songbook was so great and wasn't really being used by the new artists that he invented Michael Bublé. He invented him. He took a young, good-looking guy, had a good voice, not great, good voice. And what did he do, Jimmy? He brought in all the arrangements that the greats used. If he did Mac the Knife, he used Bobby Darin's arrangement. If he did Sinatra, that's what he did.
Yep.
And he won because Michael Bublé became hugely successful. Really, I'm not going to knock Michael Bublé. A lot of people love him. He's a good talent. He's not what you call off the charts great. But he sang those songs, and he used those same arrangements. And David Foster, who is brilliant, created a star.
Yeah. And Jimmy, Bublé was like you with your dad. He, with his grandfather, introduced him to the songbook. And that's interesting. Tell me, Jimmy, I'd like to know from you, did you and your dad have together a couple of favorite Bobby Darin numbers that you agreed on?
That's a good question. God, there was so many we did. Like, I'm trying to think of some that stand out that he would. I guess, Lazy River would be good. Artificial Flowers really was a very strong song. And if you go to the rock and roll like Dream Lover, how could you not? If you never heard this, my friend Joel Dorn, I worked with producer Joel Dorn, who actually worked with Ben Midler and Roberta Flack, and he had it right down. He goes, Dream Lover is like a perfect song. If you hear it for the first time, by the second verse, you're singing along with it. That's a hit. He goes,
that's right.
And I thought to myself, that's it in a nutshell. And so, obviously Dream Lover, but a lot of those arrangements were really good, like with Bobby and Richard West. And if you hear strings on Darin stuff, and by the time he gets to Capitol and he's with Billy May, it's just amazing, and he's doing stuff like You Made Me Love You. He's doing Blue Skies. He's doing a lot of those standards.
He's doing the standards.
And here's the thing. Darin was so respected that when he was on ADCO, before he went to Capitol, he is with Johnny Mercer, and they decided to do an album. Now, Johnny Mercer was a big guy in Capitol Records. And what happens is he admired Darin and saw his talent so much, they did an album together called Two of a Kind, and it's Bobby Darin and Johnny Mercer, Two of a Kind. And Johnny Mercer comes to Atlantic Records and records it. Comes out on ADCO, not even on Capitol. And that goes to show you the respect Johnny Mercer had for
that
him.
album. Jimmy, is a 5-star great album, Two of a Kind. Goes right up there with the Broadway Bag. These are the things that maybe people are not that familiar with, but if you ever listen to it today, it loses nothing from its originality. Mercer was most people don't really understand. This guy was probably the greatest lyricist, in an eclectic way. Jimmy, I've got a question for you. Here's a song that begins this way. Tell me the name of the song that Darin did as a ballad. I only miss her when I think of her, and I think of her all night long. What is that song?
Yeah, that's off the Broadway bag.
What's the song?
I only miss her. Yeah,
likely I met a great song. Again, a lot of people say, "Well, Darin couldn't do ballads." Bullshit. He could do great ballads.
Darin could definitely do ballads because he knew how to put them off. He could be very romantic and very slow, and he had good, not just the vocal range, but he was able to really have the dialect or the diction in a song and how to sell it, how to hang that last word. Pretty much like Sinatra. He was an extremely great chameleon, and he never was a fake. He was a true chameleon. And whenever he did a song in any genre, he was right on the money because he felt it. It was the heart. And I think that's what made him so strong,
Now
I wanted to mention, if I could, about the thing about Sam Cooke. As we mentioned earlier, he died at 33. He wrote all these incredible songs. But he was very involved in the civil rights movement and wrote songs that were very successful. He had befriended a man on a chain gang and then wrote the song about chain gang. And the other song that he wrote that was really something was I
was born on the river.
A change is going to come. And
change is going to come.
That was really prolific as far as his output of songs, but also a very prescient song about the right that, he was so involved with civil rights at a young age. He's with Jim Brown. He's with Muhammad Ali. He's with Malcolm X. He's very, very involved. And his songs are just sensational. But the idea that he did civil rights is probably not known by most people.
Well, Bobby Darin was involved with civil rights too.
Bobby Darin, yes.
Major advocate of it. Major.
What happened is, I think the story goes, just taking you back to Sam Cooke, was he heard Blowing in the Wind, and he felt he should have written that song.
Right.
And that's what was the path for him to go on to write A Change Is Going to Come. Because he did believe in civil rights, and it was a beautiful song. And it was one of his last songs, because he was killed, just shortly after that.
Was Changes Going to Come a hit when it came out?
I don't know if it was a hit, but it certainly got a lot of people talking. I mean, when a guy like a white guy like Bob Dylan says, how many roads can a man walk down before they call him a man? As Jimmy said, this was his inspiration to write these kind of songs.
Yes. And what happens is, even again, similar. There's a similarity between Bobby Darin and Sam Cooke. First of all, Bobby Darin wrote his own music and sang his music. He sang other people's, but Sam Cooke wrote his music. But these guys were business guys. They were starting to realize they wanted to own their publishing. And that's where some of that extra money is. And Sam had a good mind for business, and so did Bobby Darin. And so Darin's manager knew Alan Klein. So that little circle of people who were going to continue to flourish and grow were Darin and Sam Cooke. And Darin, being a humanitarian, I mean, he was there at the Million Man March with Martin Luther King. He really believed it. He wanted to go to Watts. He wasn't just doing it for publicity. He really felt everybody is equal. And I'm sure Arthur can attest to that, what I'm saying, because he was just as passionate, despite for the African American, even though he was white. He didn't do it because it was in vogue. He did it because he believed it. That's another the depth why I love Darin, because as I kept peeling him back, like an artichoke or like an onion, it just got deeper and deeper. And then I could see where the passion comes, how you could put off a song and make it your own. And because he just had the sight, he had the intelligence, 137 IQ, and he just was like a smorgasbord.
He was very close to Bobby Kennedy, and he wrote Bobby Kennedy's theme song in 1968, which is called "Kennedy is the Remedy," which Bobby wrote. And so he was decimated, when he got killed, of course.
Speaking of making a song your own, I'd like to know a little bit of the history behind Mac the Knife, because I am not an expert on this at all, but I know that this song originated with Kurt Weill, correct?
Yes, the Threepenny Opera.
Yes.
In the Threepenny Opera, yeah.
Jimmy, you know the story, right?
Yes, it was the dirge, and he wanted to do it because he wanted to switch genres. He had to hit the American Songbook status with Sinatra and the rest of those people. And so he goes to Ahmet Ertegun. He goes, I want to do an album of standards. And they said, you're crazy. You can't do it. You're a rock and roll singer. And he stuck to his guns. And so what happens is he does that, and it's a dirge, and he just swings it. And our friend Arthur, my friend Harriet Wasser, knew Richard West, and she has him as the arranger on that album, and it won a Grammy.
I want to add to that, Jim. I want to add to it because I have a personal thing that I can tell about this story. So when I'm about 19 years old, I became a chauffeur driver of a Cadillac with a telephone in it and a bar for a producer in Texas. And he used to produce these one-night stands. So I'm talking 1960, thereabout. And he gets a group called the Dukes of Dixieland. Great, by the way, and their music has lived forever. I got to know one of the Dukes of Dixieland. His name was Frankie Asunto. So this would be 1960. Mac was out in 1959. And I, of course, had known, Bobby in the Colony Record Shop, which is a whole other story. And we got to talking about it. He says, he played a nightclub here a couple of years ago before he became huge. He was in New Orleans. And Frankie got to know him. And Bobby said, I hear this song, and I got this thing in my head, and I hear strings and what have you. So he said, well, tell me what it is. He tells him about Mac the Knife. And he writes it. And so Frankie Asunto says, the strings that you hear, make that saxes. It's a sax line. It's the very beginning. Da, 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 da. So he gives Bobby on a napkin this sax line for the notes on the opening of Mac the Knife, along with the boom, 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 boom. So Frankie Asunto claimed, and that was a year after the thing was a hit. Bobby goes back, supposedly, hands the napkin to Dick West, and along comes this arrangement, which I would say is as great an arrangement as has ever been done on any recording. That's how high I would put it. Mac the Knife. Larry King said, greatest single record of all time, Mac the Knife.
Who said that?
Larry King.
Larry King.
I would agree. There's nothing better.
Here's a question. We've been talking almost entirely about solo acts. Were there any duos who attacked the American Songbook?
Absolutely.
Like, how do you feel about Simon and Garfunkel?
They were doing their own stuff. They were doing much of their own stuff.
Yeah.
But you had the McGuire sisters. You had the Andrews sisters. The Ames brothers.
We're under mail today. This is mail today. M-A-L-E.
What happened?
I got one for you. The Mills Brothers.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. The Ames brothers. The Four Aces.
The Four Aces.
A lot of popular songs. I mean, big Love is a Many Splendid Thing. I mean, these guys were really
the Mills brothers were really a classic American songbook.
Another singer I really just loved and who I'm sure is in this group. How do you feel about Johnny Mathis?
It's great.
Fantastic. I saw Johnny Mathis live in St. Louis. God, why I was in St. Louis, I'll never know. But there he was at the Fox Theater, and he came out. It was early in his career. He sang, it's not for me to say, and wonderful, wonderful. Place goes crazy. And then he says, I don't really like to talk to an audience. Can I just sing? and that was it. He just sang.
A great comedian many years ago said Johnny Mathis became a star and a big hit because he was singing in a studio and everything was okay, but not great. And then the air conditioning blew right into his face and his mouth went sideways. Okay, Johnny Mathis, So the whole different sound.
I thought that's how Buddy Hackett got his
Buddy
voice.
Hackett, he had a whole different problem. You know, I told Jimmy Scalia this story. It's a true story. With Darin. One night, I'm in the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston. It was a beautiful hotel, classic hotel. And who was appearing in the lounge? Buddy Greco. So I happened to be standing there, and in walks Buddy Greco, who of course I knew. I didn't know him, but I knew his profession. And I introduced myself to him. I said, "Buddy, I got to tell you, I'm a fan, and I want you to know that we're developing the Bobby Darin story." He says, "I hate the guy. He stole my Hut Huts." And I said, "I didn't know you could patent Hut Huts." But
now,
if you really listen to his stuff, Buddy Greco stuff, he was doing that. Hey, Hut, which Darin adapted. So.
Well, the difference between Bobby Darin and Buddy Greco are like night and day. Buddy Greco had a beautiful voice, but it wasn't a personality. Jack Jones didn't have a personality. Mac Monroe didn't have the personality. It's not just the voice. You got to have more than that. And not that they weren't beautiful singers. They were terrific, but they didn't have that extra thing.
That extra something.
Jimmy, you mentioned Bobby Darin as the businessman. I'll tell you who was another great businessman who wrote his own songs was Ray Charles. Ray Charles not only probably became the first black musician to have artistic control. He went Atlantic, he was all over, but he went to ABC Paramount, and ABC Paramount said, we'll give you what you want, control, creative control. He also wanted the masters. He wanted to own the masters. And he owned masters. So that he may have been blind, but it wasn't to business.
And Julian, do you know how you became a Raylet? You know how you became a Raylet?
You had to sleep with Ray. You had to sleep with
Ray.
Oh yeah. Ray Charles had 12 children with 10 women. So we're not talking about a guy who didn't socialize. He, again, may have been blind, but not to those things. He actually said his three biggest problems in life were, let's see, number one was heroin, or he called it smack. Number two, what the hell, I don't know. But number three were women. So,
well, like I said, I'm going to run this by you guys one more time. In order to become a Raylet, you had to let Ray. Just one more time for that. And whatever the case may be, back to Bobby Darin, Jimmy. He loved Ray Charles like nobody loved Ray Charles. Yes. And did a great album on Ray Charles stuff.
Right. Yes, he did. On Atco, Bobby Darin sings Ray Charles.
Didn't he have a hit? One of those things was
he did. He was up for a Grammy for that single, What I'd Say.
What I Say.
But he lost it. Yeah, he lost. It was the year after the That's All with the album that he won a Grammy. Then What I Say was up for a Grammy too the following year, and I think Frank beat him out on a song. I'm not sure exactly, but I think they were neck and neck because prior in 1960, which was the That's All album, which was really 1959, Frank did not win. Bobby won it, and he won 2 Grammys that year. Album of the Year, Record of the Year, and Best New Artist. He was the first recipient of that category, Best New Artist on the Grammys.
And he was standing there with Van Cliburn, who was 7'8".
It was
tallest piano player ever lived.
And Bobby was 5'7", right?
Right.
Well, on stage, I'm sad to say I never saw him on stage, but obviously I could see him on YouTube. I always was impressed with the fact that he moved around a lot. He just didn't sit in a chair, right?
Yes. Moved around a lot, danced around a lot. And there were times he would wear the lifts in his shoes to give him a little bit more height. As a matter of fact, I heard one of the jokes Steve Lawrence would say, and they were very tight friends. Steve Lawrence would say, "Did you hear about the accident with Bobby Darin? He fell off his shoes."
That
was Steve's.
But I'm glad you mentioned him because we shouldn't talk about the Great American Songbook singers, not mentioning Steve Lawrence. He was one of them. Great voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, he did have a good voice.
But we can't talk about Edie because today is only men.
That's right.
Well, we'll talk about Edie when we talk about the women for sure. Jimmy, are there any other singers that we've left out that perhaps are favorites of yours that would have used the American Songbook?
What Jimmy has pointed out, these guys was so terrific. I mean, so many of them. I guess Tony Martin had a career, a very big career, had an incredible voice, very deep, and had an incredible wife named Sid Charisse.
Yeah.
You guys remember Johnny Ray?
Oh yeah. And he became for a short time an incredible singing sensation. Right after one after another, Cry, a Little White Cloud That Cried, Broken Hearted. He had him boom, 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 and then he did a movie with an incredible cast called "There's No Business Like Show Business," where he was one of Dan Daly, Ethel Merman, Marilyn Monroe, Donald
Irving Berlin songs.
That's right, all Irving Berlin songs. So yes, right. I think that we are definitely missing some, Arthur, but I think we covered an awful lot of men.
Being the James Bond guy in the room, since that's been my forte over the years, I always remember the guy who sang "From Russia with Love," Matt Monroe.
Right.
Was he
Sinatra sounded like?
Yeah.
We haven't asked Mike. Mike, you're the youngest of the group. What are the male singers that mattered to you?
He's going to say Bruno Mars. I'm just kidding.
Of course. Bruno is wonderful, actually. But I was also thinking someone like Justin Timberlake be a good one to choose from. And, you can go a little bit older. Of course, Tony Bennett, for me, was just amazing.
Can't leave him out.
No, you can't. And, him doing the standards, him going through and throughout his career was just, amazing to be able to hear artists like him come through and just belt it out. It was just always wonderful.
The amazing thing about Tony Bennett was that any singer who got older, if they were lucky enough to have a good life, generally faded at the end, like Sinatra, who we loved, but he just wasn't doing it at the end. He just couldn't do it at the end. Tony Bennett, right to the last day that he recorded, was the same great voice. Amazing that he went all the way.
He had dementia and was singing, but remembered the songs.
That's right, which is part of the amazing thing about Alzheimer patients. They found out that it's music that can bring them back, at least to the songs. So the importance of music, we don't have to even question. Jimmy, was there a time that you wanted to branch out and not just do Darin, or you were perfectly happy to be the man taking care of the songs?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I was always happy to do it. It's a passion. And now I'm kind of fortunate to have the opportunity. I've become a presenter, a speaker, and I give Bobby Darin presentations and enlighten audiences of, any age group, anywhere from the 50s, 60s years of age, 70s, 80s. And it's very intimate kind of, and it's nice. I get a great thrill out of it. And the reason why I can kind of do that now, I am so happy to say that over the years, Darin has pulled together a great licensing team, a management team in 7S and 7S management. And they're at the helm now for licensing Darin music and what have you, whether it be commercials, this, that, and the other thing. And thanks to the hard work, all Bobby Darin's music, his catalog, is now available in a streaming format. While they're still printing some vinyl from time to time, like they just printed, I guess, one of his Direction albums, which was Folk Rock Protest, which he's in blue jeans. But he's writing the stuff because by the late 60s, you got FM radio coming, and he can make the change. Public sometimes was a little stiff-armed him because they wanted Mac the Knife all the time, but the guy was playing the troubadour.
I want to show a linkage here between the Great American Songbook and Bobby Darin in this case. Dodd showed me, Julian, you remember when you saw him at the Copa in 1960?
Never forgot it.
One of the first few songs he did was Love for Sale, and he did a great arrangement. It was very lilting, super arrangement. Dodd one day shows me a note that he gets from Cole Porter, handwritten. Dear Mr. Darin, just as you think, the classy thing, thank you so much for the song. You did it so great, Love for Sale. And it's a priceless little thing. I mean, I would never sell it. But it's Cole Porter, who's part of the elite of the elites, writing this handwritten note, which I bet he probably did, and maybe all those guys did, to the singers who sang their songs.
I'm interested in asking Jimmy, since you do these public appearances with people at all ages, is there a couple of consistent questions that the people always want to know that you get used to being asked?
Yes, well, they asked, do I think if they would be able to save him nowadays due to his health issues? That's one thing. And like those kind of questions, or did he take lessons, whether it be with instruments or what have you, or even singing lessons, And I says, no, he was self-taught with everything. The only lessons I heard that he took was one or two in breathing lessons, because he wanted to make sure. One of the things he did not wish for is when you sing and you take a breath, you can hear the breath in the microphone. He wanted it to be perfect without hearing the artist take that breath. So he would be able to perfect that. It was only like one or two voice lessons, but he's self-taught. It all came from inside. It all came from him. And it's I must tell you, because what happened is, now that this branched off, and, it was really Dodd. He told me, he said, Jimmy, you've been around forever, Pop, we refer to him as Pop. You know him, like I do. He says, why don't you go talk to these people and share the story? And so I do. And the life is just so amazing, and the music is amazing, that people had no idea. And I will tell you, I think I'm kind of blessed, because I realize my gimmick is I don't have a gimmick. I've just been around so long, and these people at the end of my presentations, they sometimes have a tear or two in their eye, and they're just blown away by his talent and his story and the hard knocks that he had. And there's been a couple of times that these women thank me and ask me if they can give me a hug. They're so moved that it's not that I necessarily move them. I think I became this vehicle because they're so emotional. So he does have that magnetism. He does have that power, and he is forever current. And that's where it's at,
Jimmy, did you ever get this? I was invited years ago over to one of these condominiums where they had 2,000 senior citizens, God bless them, to do a Q&A on Beyond the Sea, whatever the case may be. And I'm talking to Q, and I started hearing from all these people, started screaming out in the audience, what about Bobby Rydell? What about Bobby Sherman? What about Bobby Vinton? There were all these Bobbies, Right. So do you get
what
that?
What about Bobby Pins? I have a question for Jimmy. Jimmy,
Jesus.
Sorry, is anyone covering Mac the Knife these days?
Well, I guess they come out, and I know Bublé covered it. I'm sure, a lot of people have covered Mac the Knife. I can't really recall. And, a lot of these singers, unfortunately, like Bobby Rydell, who was exceptional. And I got to know him thanks to the Darin thing. And he was one heck of an entertainer. He was pretty, not close to a Darin, but he had that talent. He had good charisma. And I think I even gave Arthur a concert of him. And you see Bobby Rydell, he was a real deal too. He was just a little younger than Darin.
But Jimmy, whoever has covered Mac the Knife, and I may get killed for what I'm about to say, nobody's come close to what Darin did with that record, including, please forgive me, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra did it. He did it great. They had a big bang arrangement of it, but it ain't the same. I mean, Darin had the singular, greatest recording of that song. And again, I say, arguably, the greatest recording of all time.
We've got to wind this up. And Jimmy, thank you for all of your wonderful commentary. It's so heartfelt, too. Mike, I turn it over to you.
Thanks for listening to the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland.com. Remember, you could also find Tales from Hollywoodland wherever fine podcasts are found. And now you can even find us up on our new YouTube channel at no extra cost. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? If you're into social media, please check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check out what the guys have got happening this week over on their podcast. Julian, what do you got?
We've got Robert Klein, a man who's an actor, a singer, he's an author, he's quite a guy, and Jerry Seinfeld called him the Beatles of comedy. So Robert Klein will be on live, and we'll see if we can have some fun.
That is awesome. Steve, what do you got?
Well, I'm coming out of my little hiatus from my trip, but I'm working on a number of different ideas, including re-editing an interview I did with Cubby Broccoli back in 1977, which was the first interview I did in the James Bond world.
Also made a hell of a vegetable, Steve. A hell of a vegetable.
He actually talks about the family bringing broccoli to America.
Yeah,
that's right.
On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts here.
Who are you?
I'm Paul.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Dan.
What do you want?
We want to review every episode of the 1990s sci-fi TV series Babylon 5,
Its TV movies.
And its spin-off series, Crusade.
Where are you going?
all the way to the end.
Who do you serve? And who do you trust? We serve the one
And our listeners.
Who are you?
We are the Epsilon 3.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.